November last year, at the MotoGP Awards in Valencia, a screen lit up with photos of the sport's biggest legends. When Valentino Rossi's face appeared, part of the crowd started whistling. Then Marc Marquez walked up to the microphone. This was the same rider Rossi had accused of destroying his career a decade earlier. Instead of enjoying the moment, Marquez looked out at the crowd and asked for one simple thing. "Respect everyone," he said. The crowd did not respond. They just kept chanting his name instead. Think about that for a second. It was the kind of scene nobody expected, not after everything these two men had put each other through. The man Rossi spent years blaming was the one defending him. This is not a story about a rider nobody liked. For most of his career, Valentino Rossi was the single most beloved athlete in the history of two-wheeled racing. He turned ordinary grandstands into oceans of yellow. He made people who had never watched a motorbike race in their lives fall in love with the sport. So what does it actually mean to call him hated? It does not mean the whole world turned on him. It means something stranger. Valentino Rossi became one of the rare athletes capable of splitting an entire sport straight down the middle. Wherever he went, people picked a side, his side, or the other one. And that split did not start with Marquez in 2015. By the time these two men ever raced wheel to wheel, Rossi had already spent years turning rivals into enemies, teammates into strangers, and entire garages into war zones. This video is going to walk through exactly how that happened. An official punishment from race officials, a rival Rossi cursed out loud, and a career that never recovered. A fistfight that never made it into the record books. A teammate who compared sharing a garage with him to living in a henhouse. And by the end, you will understand why, 10 years after their war began, it was Marquez asking the crowd to stop. 2015, the Malaysian Grand Prix at Sepang. Rossi and Marquez are fighting for the same piece of track, side by side, at racing speed. It happens on lap 7, far from the cameras that usually catch these moments. Then contact. Marquez goes down. Marquez says Rossi kicked out at him, breaking his brake lever and sending him crashing to the ground. He later said he had never seen anything like it before, one rider kicking another rider mid-race. Rossi tells a different story. He says it was only his handlebar brushing against Marquez's leg. And that footage from a helicopter proves Marquez had already lost control before any contact happened. Race officials did not need to settle who was right in the court of public opinion. They had their own court, and they made their own ruling. Rossi was given 3 penalty points on his racing license. That penalty forced him to start from the very back of the grid at the final race of the season in Valencia. He lost the World Championship by 5 points. Jorge Lorenzo, his own teammate, ended up winning that championship instead by a margin smaller than the penalty that sent Rossi to the back of the grid in the first place. His own team at Yamaha appealed the decision, but the panel rejected it unanimously. Yamaha's managing director, Lynn Jarvis, did not stand up and claim Rossi was innocent. He said plainly that he was not defending Rossi's actions, and that the reason Rossi received the penalty was because officials judged it was not a legal racing move. He only argued that the punishment felt too harsh for a rider who was not usually considered dirty. Think about what that actually means. Rossi's own team, the people paid to protect him, could not bring themselves to say he did nothing wrong. For the first time, the war between these two men stopped being just an opinion argued over in interviews and on message boards. It became an official punishment, written into the record books, and it cost Valentino Rossi a world championship. 2004, the very first MotoGP race ever held in Qatar. Sand kept blowing onto the track, and teams were told they could clean their grid positions before the start. Rossi's crew did exactly that, using a scooter to spin circles on his spot on the grid. Officials later ruled this broke the rules. The team that filed the official protest against Rossi was Sete Gibernau's. The protest worked. Rossi was penalized and dropped down the starting grid. He fought his way back through the field anyway, all the way up to the front, before crashing out on lap 6. Gibernau went on to win the race, cutting Rossi's massive championship lead almost in half overnight. Rossi did not take the loss quietly. In front of the press, he said something that sounded less like a comment on a race and more like a threat. He said Gibernau would not win another race. Nobody thought much of it at the time. Riders say things in the heat of the moment. This was just Valentino Rossi, being Valentino Rossi, they said. But watch what actually happened next. The following year, at Jerez, on the final lap, on the final corner, Rossi ran Gibernau wide and took the win for himself. Gibernau finished second, and the crowd never forgot the image of him being pushed off the racing line by his biggest rival. Jerez was Gibernau's home race, in front of his own countrymen, which made the manner of the defeat even harder to swallow. After that season, Sete Gibernau never won another MotoGP race again. Not one. This was a rider who had won 8 races across the 2 seasons before Rossi made that promise in the paddock. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe a career simply faded on its own timeline. But the timing lines up so perfectly with Rossi's own words that it is hard to look away from. This is the part of Rossi's story that rarely gets told the same way as the trophies and the victories. He did not just beat the riders around him on the stopwatch. Once he decided a rival was a threat, he found ways to get inside their head, and sometimes that rival simply never fully recovered. Sete Gibernau was the first name on that list. He would not be the last. 2001, the Catalan Grand Prix in Barcelona. Rossi has just won the race, coming back from as low as 15th place after an early collision, and overtaking Max Biaggi along the way to the top step. For most riders, that kind of comeback ends with a smile on the podium and a bottle of champagne. For Rossi and Biaggi, it ended somewhere else entirely, in the tunnel underneath the podium, away from the cameras. Biaggi walked straight up to Rossi's manager and shoved him. Then he turned toward Rossi himself, making it clear the confrontation was not over. Rossi asked him directly what he thought he was doing. Biaggi's answer was blunt. He told Rossi there would be more waiting for him if he dared to come up to the podium. Rossi later described the atmosphere in that tunnel as feeling like a real fight was about to break out. He was careful with his words afterward, calling it only half a scuffle rather than a full brawl, saying the two of them never actually landed a real punch on each other. But somebody still had to physically pull the two riders apart before it went further. The scuffle in that tunnel became one of the defining images of their entire rivalry, retold for years afterward. Think about what that scene actually looked like. Two of the fastest men on the planet, still in their racing gear, still sweating from a Grand Prix, having to be separated by other people just to stop them from throwing punches. This was not an isolated flash of temper. Before Rossi ever reached the top class, Biaggi had already won 4 consecutive 250 cubic centimeter world titles, and he did not appreciate watching a younger rider arrive and immediately start taking his headlines. By the time they were racing wheel to wheel in the premier class, the rivalry had stopped being about who crossed the line first. The problem with Rossi's biggest rivalries was that they rarely stayed contained inside a helmet or inside 90 minutes on a racetrack. They followed the men involved into tunnels, into press conferences, and into moments the television cameras never caught. By the end of the 2009 season, Valentino Rossi had a problem he had never really faced before. His own teammate, a young rider named Jorge Lorenzo, had just finished second in the championship, right behind him. No teammate had ever pushed Rossi that close before. Rossi's response was blunt. Speaking to the BBC, he said Yamaha would have to decide between him and Jorge for the following season, and reminded everyone he had a very real option to leave for Ducati instead. It was, in plain terms, an ultimatum. Choose me or lose me. Yamaha did not choose. They kept both riders under contract and simply tried to manage the fallout as best they could. What that fallout actually looked like became one of the strangest sights in the sport. Because the two riders used different tire brands in those years, Yamaha built 2 completely separate garages inside the same team with a wall running straight down the middle to keep information from leaking between the 2 sides. Years later, Lorenzo described what it actually felt like to live inside that arrangement. He said it was like a chicken coop with 2 roosters trapped in the same small pen. Both of them were ultra-competitive, both of them were proud, and both of them were absolutely convinced they were the best rider in the world. Think about that image for a second. 2 of the greatest riders of their generation, sharing a factory, sharing a bike, separated by an actual physical wall because their own team could not trust them to coexist peacefully in the open. But this part of Rossi's story does not end the way the others do. Lorenzo later admitted something surprising. He said the greater the distance grew between the two of them, once they were no longer teammates, the greater their mutual respect became. They never became close friends, but Rossi eventually invited him out to his own ranch and even lent him a motorcycle to ride on his private track. Not every rival Rossi made stayed an enemy forever. Some of them, given enough time and enough distance, found their way back to something close to respect. Marc Marquez would soon find out whether he belonged on that same short list or somewhere else entirely. The war that outlived both men. We started this story in Valencia with the whistles. Now let us go back and see how this final chapter really came together. In 2015, Rossi said something simple but heavy. He said Marquez had destroyed everything he believed in about the sport. That one sentence never really left him. 9 years later, in 2024, he said it again, even stronger, calling Marquez the dirtiest rider he had ever raced against. Marquez did not fight back. He simply said Rossi could think whatever he wanted. Time would judge them both, and he seemed content to wait. Then came that moment in Valencia. Rossi was being booed, and Marquez picked up a microphone. He did not talk about 2015. He did not mention Sepang. He said only 2 words: respect everyone. It sounded small, but it landed hard. A man who once helped start this war was now asking the crowd to put it down. Weeks later, a reporter asked Marquez why he had said it. His answer was honest and simple. He said carrying resentment for so long is very hard. He was not saying the war was over. He was not asking to be forgiven. He was simply saying he was tired of holding it. Rossi never answered back. Maybe he did not need to. The fans had already answered for him, still choosing sides 10 years later, long after the 2 men who started it had grown tired of the fight. And that is the strangest part of this whole story. The 2 men at the center of the war seemed almost ready to let it go. It was everyone else, the fans, the paddock, the sport itself, who kept it alive. So who really moved on? Was it the man who once vowed to end his rival and never fully let it go? Or was it the rival who, 10 years later, finally asked a stadium full of strangers to lay the grudge down? Maybe that is what being an outcast really means in the end. Not a man the world forgot. A man the world simply never stopped arguing about.